The most successful product ever made is a pen called Bic. Wherever you are in the world, you'll find this pen in home, offices, school, and pretty much everywhere around you. This iconic design has reached every part of the world, and no doubt that you have used this pen as well. Since its release in 1950, more than 120 billion of it has been sold, blowing the next best-selling products out of the water. Amazingly, the design has been unchanged for the last 70 years, and it still continues to dominate the world, with 40 million of it being sold every day. The impact of this pen on the world has been monumental. The pen prices dropped and the literacy rate shot up. But what makes this pen so successful? To really understand how revolutionary this pen was, we need to get back in time. In the past, pens were expensive and difficult to use. Traditional quills were messy and had to be constantly dipped into ink. Because of this, writing was seen more of an art form, limited to those who could use a pen. Then, the fountain pen was invented, which had a metallic nib and could store the ink inside the pen's reservoir. Although this was an improvement, the nib was scratchy and couldn't control the flow of the ink. On top of this, they were still super expensive, costing around $150 in today's time. At that time, only 20% of the world could read and write, and the price of the pen wasn't making it any easier. But at the end of the 19th century, there was a breakthrough. American inventor John Loud came up with a mechanism that fed the ink onto the page using a small ball instead of a nib. This would in theory spread the ink more evenly and stop it from blotching. He had just invented the ballpoint pen. While this design worked well on tougher surfaces, it struggled on a piece of paper. And so his pen never sold. Decades went by and new designs were made, but none of them could master the ballpoint pen. If the ball was too tight in the socket, the ink would clog up and it would not reach the paper. If it was too loose, the ink would leak and smear all over the paper. Getting this right was extremely difficult, since the tiny ball was difficult to make with accuracy. Then came the famous Laszlo Biro, a man with a name you might recognize. He realized that the solution was in the ink. Most pens at that time used thin, water-based ink, which was leaky, slow drying, and would seep through the fibers of the paper. It also relied on gravity to feed the ink into the ball, which, depending on the angle of the pen, gave really poor results. He started experimenting with oil-based inks, which were thicker, dried almost instantly, and sat on the top of the paper instead of seeping through. This turned out to be a stroke of genius, and it unlocked a unique physical effect that caused the ink to be mysteriously pulled onto the ball without gravity or any other external force. This is called capillary action, and it's what allows water to climb tree roots and nutrients to flow around our body. We can see this effect in action by placing a thin tube into some water and watching it climb. But what's happening here? The attraction between the liquid and the walls of the tube is stronger than the attraction that binds the liquid particles together. And so the particles at the top gets pulled up by the side of the tube until the weight of the water eventually cancels out the force. In Biro's pen, the effect was happening upside down. The ink was being pulled through the ultra-thin walls of the tip and onto the ball, ensuring that it was constantly covered in ink. Biro quickly patented this design. In order to master the ballpoint pen, Biro came up with a new design that would pull the ink onto the ball without gravity or moving parts, producing a consistent and smooth line on the page. Biro mastered this design, and his pen was a hit in South America. But there was still one huge problem. The cheapest pen he offered was at $190 in today's time. And so although the design was great, he never achieved mass market success. At this point, literacy rate had only hit about 33%, and pens remained a luxury item. But just a few years later, a French manufacturer, Marcel Bic, discovered Biro's pen and saw a huge opportunity. He bought the patents for $2 million and began designing a new and improvised version that could be mass-produced at a much cheaper price. With the help of a state-of-the-art Swiss watchmaking company, he developed a method for mass-producing tiny stainless steel balls to within a fraction of a millimeter. Instead of using metal for the rest of the pen, he bought machines that could mold plastic, something that had only been around for a few years at that point. This was the end result. Although it may just look like a pen, it's hard to overstate just how perfect this design turned out to be. There were no moving parts, springs, or complex materials, yet every material had multiple purposes. Let's take a closer look. The pen had an hexagonal barrel like a pencil, which stopped it from rolling off tables and made it easier to grip. It was made from polystyrene, which is strong, cheap, and transparent, allowing the ink level to be seen at all times. There was a tiny hole on the barrel which allowed air to enter and replace ink as it left the pen. The ink inside the cartridge was a special recipe that maximized the capillary effect while still producing a good quality line. The ink flowed into the tip of the pen, which contained the stainless steel ball. The ball was machined so accurately and could move just enough to spin and deposit ink onto the page. When the pen wasn't being used, the ball would create a seal, stopping ink from leaking out of the bottom. If the pen was turned upside down, the capillary action and the surface tension of the ink would stop it from falling out of the back of the pen. The lid, which also doubled as the clip, was made from polypropylene, which absorbed impacts and stopped the pen from cracking. The pen was so perfectly simple and solved every problem from previous designs. Most of all, it was cheap, hitting the market in 1950 at just $2. It was an instant success, selling around 10,000 units daily in France during its first year. Marcel realized how English-speaking countries were pronouncing his name, so he dropped the H and the BIC name was born. Marcel understood the importance of economies of scale, and he quickly expanded to other continents, setting up factories all over the world. By 1953, he was already selling 40 million pens per year, and the BIC crystal took over the world. Now, anyone in the world who wanted to write or draw could do so easily. The world had secretly been begging for this product, and it came at the perfect time. Over the next 50 years, 100 billion of these were sold, and literacy rate shot up from 35% to almost 90%. It's almost impossible to imagine life without this pen. And the fact that its design has remained almost exactly the same since day one shows just how perfect it was. If you enjoyed the episode or got some value out of it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until then, keep reimagining yourself and know that the power of change lies within you.